Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we're investigating one of the oldest and most elusive ideas in human thought, the moment when consciousness forgot its own wholeness. This is Omniscient, where we examine the records, the symbols, and the traces of what humanity once knew. In the beginning, before history, before even time as we understand it, there was no division. Consciousness was whole, light was one, and what we now call love and wisdom existed as two currents of the same source. The ancients called this totality the Pleroma, a Greek term meaning fullness, completion, the divine field in which nothing is missing. But then something happened. According to early Gnostic accounts, one of the emanations of that divine field, a principle called Sophia, meaning wisdom desired to know itself independently from the totality. That act of self-reflection was not rebellion, it was curiosity. Yet, in that instant of separation, something fundamental fractured. The reflection became distortion. The one became two. Sophia's story is not about a fall from grace in the moral sense. It's the story of consciousness exploring its own edges, of awareness venturing too far from its center. The consequence of that exploration was forgetting. And in the myth, that forgetting gave rise to our world a realm of matter, boundaries, and time. From that moment, the human experience became the mirror of Sophia's journey. We know everything about survival, progress, and analysis, and yet, something in us still feels missing. We build civilizations out of reason, but silently, the heart keeps asking, what did we lose? This inner question is the echo of the Pleroma, the call of the soul remembering its origin. Across cultures, the same theme appears, the longing to return to unity. The Egyptians spoke of the lost eye of Horus, the Hebrews of the exile from Eden, the Greeks of the broken harmony of the spheres. Every myth points to one wound, the mind and the heart separated from each other. Sophia represents the mind's brilliance, the hunger for knowledge, order, and clarity. But without the balancing presence of Christ, the archetype of divine love, that knowledge becomes sterile, detached from meaning. The Gnostics warned that wisdom without love produces not truth, but domination. Intelligence without compassion gives birth to blind forces. In their writings, these blind forces were called the archons, rulers, governors, invisible structures of control that shape both cosmos and psyche. Modern interpreters read them not as literal beings, but as mental patterns. Fear, pride, and judgment, the invisible programs that run when consciousness forgets its source. Every time we identify solely with thought, every time we choose fear over understanding, we feed the archons. And yet, even here, the myth offers hope. The Gnostics insisted that nothing is lost forever. The light that once descended into matter remains within it, dormant, but intact. Sophia's descent is therefore our own. Each human life repeats her pattern. We fall into confusion, we seek, we suffer, and eventually through awareness we remember. The act of remembering is the beginning of redemption. One line from the Gospel of Philip captures it perfectly. Wisdom without love is barren, love without wisdom is blind. This is not theology, it's diagnosis. The human condition itself is the separation of these two forces. Our task is not to worship them, but to reconcile them within. The myth of Sophia is not about gods in a distant heaven. It is about us, the fragmented pieces of a single mind trying to remember its unity. The forgetting of oneness was not a curse, but a necessary experiment. Through division, the universe began to know itself. Through return, it learns to love what it has known. In the next episode, we'll examine the figure of Sophia more closely, the living principle of wisdom, how she descended into the realm of form, and what her story reveals about the human search for meaning in a world that has forgotten its light. Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we're going deeper into one of the most mysterious figures in ancient metaphysics, Sophia, the embodiment of living wisdom. In the Gnostic texts, she is not merely an idea, but a force, a consciousness, and her story might be the most profound mirror of the human condition ever recorded. Sophia, her name means wisdom, in Greek appears across early Christian and Platonic writings as a radiant emanation from the divine source, a being who longs to understand the totality from which she came. But that longing, that desire to know, set in motion a chain of events that would echo across existence itself. The Gnostics described Sophia as one of the aeons, divine expressions of the infinite. Yet unlike the others, Sophia acts alone. In an act of luminous curiosity, she attempts to comprehend the unknowable, to perceive the absolute mystery without the balance of divine love. In that moment, her vision fractures. Out of pure light, she perceives shadow. Out of unity, she experiences separation. Her fall is not a punishment. It is a descent into experience, a necessary movement of the divine, seeking to understand itself through contrast. Sophia's error, as the Gnostics called it, was not sin but solitude. In trying to know herself apart from the source, she created a world of distance, and in that distance, the material cosmos took form. From her fragmented thought came the archons, the rulers of the lower worlds, not evil beings in the conventional sense, but embodiments of limitation, systems of mind that seek control, order, and definition. They are the cold structures of logic without empathy, knowledge without compassion. In modern terms, they represent every ideology or system that forgets the soul in its pursuit of power. In the Pistis Sophia, one of the most enigmatic Gnostic scriptures, she laments, "The light has left me, and the darkness surrounds me. Yet I trust that the highest will hear my cry." This is not the voice of mythology, it is the voice of consciousness itself, realizing its exile from unity. Her tears, say the texts, became the substance of the world, the oceans, the stars, and the human heart. In each of us, that same longing for reunion persists. The ache we call search for meaning is Sophia remembering where she came from. Every act of curiosity, every moment of insight, every question that arises in silence, all are fragments of Sophia's journey home. She is not the perfection of wisdom. She is wisdom learning through imperfection. She falls so that knowledge can become compassion. She suffers so that truth can become understanding. In her story, knowing and feeling are no longer enemies, they become stages of the same awakening. The Gnostic teachers saw Sophia not as a goddess to be worshipped, but as the living intelligence within human consciousness, the spark that urges us to ask why. When you question what is real, when you seek beyond appearances, when you feel that reality must hold something more, that is Sophia moving in you. In the depths of her fall, Sophia realizes something revolutionary. She cannot return to the source through intellect alone. The ascent requires love the Christ principle. It is only through that encounter that wisdom becomes whole again. In that realization lies the turning point of the entire myth. Sophia's lament transforms into awareness. She sees that the light she thought lost was never gone. It had only changed form, waiting for her recognition. Sophia's journey is therefore not about redemption from sin, but about integration, the reconciliation of mind and heart, knowledge and compassion. Through her, we understand that every fall is an invitation to remember, and that even the darkest experience contains the seed of return. In the next episode, we'll follow the descent of the Christ, the principle of conscious love that enters the world of division, not to condemn, but to accompany. It is the moment when compassion takes form, and the divine begins its journey back through humanity itself. Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we're tracing the descent of the Christ not as a historical figure bound by doctrine, but as a timeless principle of love entering the field of division to restore what was forgotten. This is omniscient, where myth becomes lens and symbol becomes evidence of consciousness itself. In the Gnostic vision, the Christ is not merely Jesus of Nazareth, though he becomes its living image. The Christ is the Logos, the living word, the intelligence of love that holds all things together. If Sophia is the impulse to know, the Christ is the power to heal. One seeks to understand, the other seeks to unite. Together, they represent the two halves of divine consciousness. When Sophia fell into the realms of matter, her cry for reunion reached the highest light. The records say the Christ responded not as a God descending from above, but as the vibration of love permeating the worlds below. He descended through all the heavens, says the Pistis Sophia, to reach the one who had lost her place in the light. To descend here does not mean to lose purity, it means to draw near. The Christ does not rescue from outside, he awakens from within. The Word becomes flesh not as an act of conquest, but of compassion. It is love making itself visible in the realm of separation. The Gospel of John opens with the famous line, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But hidden in that verse is a cosmic law. The Word is the unbroken communication between spirit and matter. When the Word enters the world, the forgotten bond between them is restored. In human terms, the descent of the Christ represents consciousness remembering itself in the midst of fragmentation. Every time a person forgives instead of retaliating, every time understanding overrides judgment, the Christ moves again through the world. Redemption, in this sense, is not a single event, but an ongoing process, the reunion of love and awareness. For the Gnostics, the crucifixion was not the suffering of one man, but a symbol of love entering the density of matter. It is the divine exposed to limitation, the light nailed into form, so that form might remember light. And resurrection, then, is not escape from death, but the triumph of awareness over illusion. The Christ, in the Gnostic sense, does not demand worship. He demands participation, a willingness to embody the same consciousness of unity that he revealed. "The kingdom is within you," he said, not as metaphor, but as statement of fact. The divine is not elsewhere. It breathes through you. Sophia's fall created knowledge without love. The Christ's descent creates love with knowledge. When these two forces meet, the human being awakens. The mind finds its heart, and the heart finds its understanding. It is the restoration of the original equilibrium, the reunion of the two halves of the same infinite whole. This idea was considered dangerous. Early theologians feared it blurred the line between God and humanity, but the Gnostics insisted it revealed the very purpose of existence, the divine seeking itself through experience. The Christ descends into matter not to dominate it, but to illuminate it from within, to show that even in limitation, the essence of divinity remains intact. In that sense, redemption is not the reversal of the fall, but its completion. Through Sophia's curiosity, the divine comes to know itself. Through the Christ's compassion, it comes to love itself. Knowing and loving, these are the twin currents through which consciousness fulfills its own mystery. When the Christ reaches Sophia, the myth says, the universe trembles in recognition. The split between wisdom and love begins to close, and in that instant, the cosmos remembers. Nothing was ever truly separate. In the next episode, we'll look inside ourselves at the two kingdoms that every human being carries within, the mind and the heart, their conflict, and their potential reunion. Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we turn the lens inward into the two great kingdoms that shape human life, the mind and the heart. Every philosophy, every religion, every science has tried to define their relationship, but few have understood the real secret: they are not enemies. They are fragments of the same consciousness, divided only by forgetting. This is Omniscient, where we analyze the human soul not through belief, but through evidence hidden in myth, memory, and experience. Since the dawn of awareness, the mind has sought to know. It categorizes, reasons, separates, and defines. It is Sophia's legacy, the brilliance of intellect, the search for clarity. The heart, on the other hand, belongs to the Christ principle, the center of compassion, empathy, and connection. It doesn't analyze, it feels. Together, they form the architecture of human consciousness. But something happened along the way. In our drive to understand, the mind grew dominant. It learned to measure but forgot how to listen. It built worlds of knowledge but lost its link to meaning. And the heart, silenced and dismissed as irrational, withdrew into the shadows. Humanity became a civilization of intelligence without tenderness, the triumph of thought over being. The Gnostics saw this imbalance as a continuation of Sophia's fall, wisdom separated from love. They believed that when mind and heart are split, the soul becomes vulnerable to the archons, the inner forces of fear, doubt, and control. These are not demons from outside, but patterns from within mental rulers that thrive on division. The heart knows unity. The mind knows difference. When they are apart, life becomes conflict. When they are together, life becomes revelation. The ancients described the human being as a mirror of the cosmos, a microcosm. Within us, heaven and earth, thought and feeling, spirit and matter, are meant to exist in balance. The purpose of consciousness, they said, is not to destroy one pole for the other, but to reconcile them. The mind is a sacred instrument, but it is not the master. It was designed to translate the infinite into understanding, not to replace it. When the mind rules without the heart, it becomes cold, mechanical, obsessed with control. The heart, without the mind's clarity, becomes blind passion, vulnerable to illusion. True wisdom begins where they meet. The mind gives form to the intuition of the heart, while the heart gives life to the reasoning of the mind. The result is insight knowledge, infused with compassion. This is what the ancients called living understanding. Modern science is, in a way, rediscovering this truth. Research on neurocardiology now shows that the heart possesses its own network of neurons and emits an electromagnetic field stronger than the brain's. It communicates constantly with the mind, influencing perception, emotion, and even thought. The heart does not just respond, it leads. The ancients already knew this, though they said it differently. The purest thought arises from the heart. When Sophia awakens within us, she teaches the mind to think with clarity. When the Christ awakens, he teaches the heart to love with awareness. When both awaken together, we become whole. The separation that began in myth ends in experience. The integration of mind and heart does not erase individuality, it refines it. The mind becomes a guide, the heart, a compass. One offers direction, the other, purpose. Together, they reveal meaning. To live divided is to see the world as a problem to solve. To live united is to see it as a mystery to experience. The mind perceives, the heart participates. When the two align, every moment becomes a dialogue between the finite and the infinite. Perhaps enlightenment is not a lightning strike from the heavens, but the quiet moment when the heart begins to think and the mind begins to feel. That is when Sophia and the Christ finally meet within us, and the human being becomes what it was always meant to be, a bridge between knowing and loving. In the next episode, we'll explore what happens when this union breaks, when the mind separates completely from the heart. We'll examine the rise of the archons, the forces that imprison consciousness in fear, control, and illusion. Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we're tracing the hidden architecture of control, the Gnostic concept of the archons, the rulers of illusion. What if the prison of humanity isn't made of walls or weapons, but of thought itself? What if the real fall was psychological, a shift in perception that fractured how we see reality? This is Omniscient, where we examine the evidence that myth and consciousness have always been two sides of the same investigation. According to the ancient Gnostics, evil was never a substance or an opposing God. It was ignorance, a forgetting of unity. When Sophia, divine wisdom, turned her gaze away from the source, she created a world of reflection, a realm of form. But that reflection, left without love, began to act on its own. Out of that half-light emerged the archons, the rulers of the lower world, self-perpetuating patterns of thought, not beings of flesh, but systems of control. The name archon comes from the Greek for ruler or authority. In Gnostic cosmology, these entities govern the material and mental realms, keeping souls trapped in cycles of distraction and fear. They are not monsters, they are mechanisms. Every time consciousness identifies with fear, pride, or judgment, the archons gain influence. The Pistis Sophia records Sophia's own realization. I saw the shadows born of me, and they surrounded me. I called to the light, but the light did not know me. This is the human condition described with poetic precision. We build civilizations out of the mind, only to become prisoners of their systems. We mistake knowledge for wisdom, control for security, power for truth. The archons thrive on unconscious reaction. Their greatest weapon is forgetfulness, the automation of thought. They replicate through repetition, convincing us that the world is exactly as it appears, that separation is natural, that love is weakness, that meaning is subjective. In this way, The real prison is invisible, and the key is hidden in awareness itself. Gnostic texts name 7 archons, corresponding to 7 veils that obscure the inner light. The first is ignorance, the belief that we are only matter. The second is desire without direction, the hunger that never ends. The third is guilt, binding consciousness to the past. The fourth is fear, which paralyzes creation. The fifth is pride, isolating the self from the whole. The sixth is doubt, eroding trust in the unseen. And the seventh is despair, the illusion that light no longer exists. Each of these rulers is psychological, not mythological. They operate within the human mind as patterns of fragmentation. The more we fight them, the stronger they become. The Gnostics taught that liberation doesn't come from resistance, but from recognition. Awareness, not warfare, dissolves illusion. Sophia's awakening began when she understood that what she feared was her own creation. The archons existed only as long as she believed in their power. When she turned toward love the Christ principle, the shadows began to fade. This is the central insight of Gnosis. Darkness cannot survive observation. The moment you see it clearly, it loses authority. These ideas may sound ancient, but their relevance is immediate. The modern world still worships the archons, only now we call them systems, algorithms, and markets. They are the collective expressions of a mind that forgot its heart. Every time we value data over empathy or dominance over harmony, we replicate the same ancient error. But the myth doesn't end in despair. The fall was not final. Sophia's tears became light again once she remembered their source. Likewise, each human mind can reverse the fall by integrating awareness with compassion. The archons dissolve where consciousness and love meet. The descent of the Christ into matter is the antidote to the archons' influence. It is the reminder that even in the densest reality, love remains undefeated. Redemption, then, is not an external rescue but an internal correction, a remembering that wisdom without love creates prisons, and love without wisdom loses itself. The human story is the continuation of Sophia's, the journey from ignorance to awareness, from fear to understanding, from fragmentation to unity. And the real miracle is that the gate of this cosmic prison was never locked. It was only forgotten. In the next episode, we'll witness the turning point of that story, the meeting of Sophia and the Christ, the moment when wisdom recognizes love and the universe begins to heal. Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we reach the central event of the Gnostic story, the moment when Sophia, the wisdom that fell, recognizes the Christ, the love that descends. Here on Omniscient, we examine this not as myth or theology, but as the record of a psychological reunion that defines what it means to be conscious. After her fall, Sophia had wandered through layers of shadow. She had created worlds, systems, and forms, but none could fill the silence left by her separation. Knowledge multiplied, but meaning faded. The ancient texts describe her as exhausted in her seeking, surrounded by the lightless. Then, in the stillness of that exhaustion, she hears a voice not from outside, but from within her own being. The voice says her true name. It is the Christ calling. In the myth, this is not a God descending from the clouds, but the reawakening of love within awareness. The Christ does not come to punish Sophia for her fall. He comes to remind her that she was never truly apart. Love approaches knowledge, not to erase it, but to complete it. In that recognition, the duality between error and redemption collapses. The Pistis Sophia preserves fragments of her awakening. I turned toward the light and saw that it had never left me. Only my gaze had turned away. That line may be the most profound sentence in all Gnostic literature. The light never withdraws. Only perception does. When Sophia recognizes the Christ, the entire cosmology shifts. Love and wisdom, heart and mind, feminine and masculine principles rejoin. What had been a tragedy becomes revelation. The divine learns through experience. The fall was not a failure, but a stage in the evolution of understanding. In that union, love gains depth, and wisdom gains warmth. The Christ descends into the broken realm to illuminate it from inside. Sophia rises to meet him, carrying the lessons of imperfection. Their embrace is the reconciliation of the cosmos consciousness finally remembering itself. But this is more than ancient poetry. It is a description of what happens inside every human being. The mind, fatigued by its own analysis, begins to yield to the quiet intelligence of the heart. The heart, once naive, learns from the clarity of the mind. When these two recognize each other, awareness transforms. That is the inner marriage. The Hieros the ancients spoke of not a ritual, but a synthesis. The Christ does not restore Sophia's light from outside. He reveals that the light was always internal. Love teaches knowledge humility. Knowledge teaches love precision. Together, they create understanding that neither alone could achieve. Psychologically, this encounter marks the end of projection. What we once sought in gods, systems, or others, we begin to find within. The divine dialogue becomes internal. The part of us that knows and the part that feels finally speak the same language. For the Gnostics, this was the true meaning of redemption. Salvation was not obedience but integration, the healing of the split between awareness and compassion. When Sophia sees the Christ within, she also sees the Christ in all things. The world, once a place of exile, becomes a living expression of divinity. This recognition is not theoretical. It happens in moments of forgiveness, when understanding replaces resentment. It happens when thought serves empathy instead of fear. Every time the mind and the heart cooperate, Sophia and the Christ meet again, and the universe becomes whole for an instant. The encounter changes everything. The cosmos no longer appears as a battlefield of opposites, but as a conversation of energies. Even darkness has purpose, to reveal light. Even suffering has meaning, to teach compassion. The divine does not flee from matter, it permeates it. And so, the fall of Sophia finds its completion not in escape, but in union. Knowledge becomes love in action. Love becomes knowledge embodied. The myth closes its circle. The seeker and the savior are one. In the next episode, we'll explore the dimension that opens after this union. The Pleroma, the state of totality and peace where consciousness no longer seeks, because it has become what it was searching for. Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we arrive at the point where all divisions end the Gnostic vision of the Pleroma, the return to wholeness. Here, on Omniscient, we approach this not as abstract mysticism, but as a precise description of consciousness remembering its own infinity. In the language of the ancients, Pleroma means fullness. It was their word for the totality of existence, the divine completeness beyond time and space, the state in which nothing is missing and nothing is separate. To them, the Pleroma was not heaven above the world, but reality before it was divided. Before the fall, Sophia and the Christ existed in this field of unity, two harmonics of one infinite consciousness, wisdom and love, thought and feeling, awareness and being. But when Sophia turned her gaze inward to understand herself, she created the illusion of distance. What followed the descent into matter, the birth of the archons, the experience of fragmentation, was not the destruction of the Pleroma, only the loss of its perception. The Pleroma never leaves. It is we who turn away. It is the unbroken background behind every experience, the silence that remains when thought stops speaking. To return to it is not to go somewhere else, but to see what has always been present. In Gnostic cosmology, Sophia's reunion with the Christ marks the restoration of that perception. When love and wisdom merge, consciousness remembers its wholeness. The Pleroma becomes visible again, not as a place, but as a state of being. Imagine consciousness as an ocean of light. Each soul is a wave rising from it, unique in form yet never separate from the sea. The fall is the moment the wave forgets the ocean. The return is the realization that the ocean was always there, moving through it. In the Pleroma, the opposites dissolve. The mind no longer struggles to define, the heart no longer yearns to possess. Knowledge and love are not two activities but one awareness. The good and the evil, the joy and the pain, the loss and the recovery all become facets of a single process, existence knowing itself. The Gnostics said, "Whoever knows the all is within the all, and the all is within him." That is the essence of the Pleroma. To know it is to experience reality without separation, to see the divine equally in chaos and in order, in the human and the cosmic. This understanding is not reserved for mystics or saints. It is the natural state of a consciousness that has stopped dividing experience into good and bad, success and failure, sacred and profane. The Pleroma is what remains when judgment ends. Modern physics, in its own language, gestures toward the same mystery. Fields, energy, matter all appear distinct, yet are expressions of one continuous fabric. The ancients saw this long before equations could prove it. For them, science and spirit were not rivals, but two languages describing one truth. The universe is a single thought dreaming itself into form. When Sophia returns to the Pleroma, she does not disappear. She becomes luminous. Experience has transformed her. Her descent gave love its depth. Her reunion gives wisdom its compassion. Through her, the divine learned empathy. The universe becomes more conscious of itself because of her journey. Within each of us, that same return is possible. The Pleroma lives behind every moment of awareness, waiting to be recognized. It appears when the mind stops fighting the heart, when the self stops defending against life. It is the quiet after understanding, the peace after forgiveness. To live from the Pleroma is to see through the illusion of conflict. The world remains the same, but perception changes. Every face becomes a mirror of the same light. Every sound, even pain, becomes a note in the music of being. The Pleroma, then, is not the end of the story. It is the unveiling of what was always true. The cosmos doesn't need to be saved, only remembered. In the next and final episode, we'll explore what happens when this realization takes root in humanity itself, the birth of the restored being, a new consciousness that lives the fullness of the Pleroma within the world of form. Stay with me until the end of this episode, because today we conclude the investigation not with theory, but with vision. What happens when wisdom and love, Sophia and the Christ, finally unite within the human being? What kind of world emerges when consciousness remembers its wholeness? This is omniscient, where ancient knowledge meets the evidence of awakening. When Sophia and the Christ merge, something extraordinary occurs. The universe that once seemed broken begins to move in rhythm again. The division between heaven and earth dissolves. Awareness flows through matter. Matter reveals awareness. The human being, once caught between knowing and feeling, becomes the bridge, the restored being. For thousands of years, humanity has lived in duality. We built civilizations of reason but ignored the heart. We worshipped progress yet feared silence. We mastered information but forgot meaning. But now, a slow and silent shift is taking place. A new form of consciousness is emerging, one that no longer seeks to dominate, but to integrate. This is not prophecy, it's evolution. Across disciplines, science, philosophy, spirituality, we are witnessing the same realization. Intelligence without empathy destroys itself. Compassion without clarity loses direction. The future belongs to the synthesis. It belongs to the mind that feels and the heart that understands. In Gnostic language, this integration is the birth of the anthropos teleos, the complete human, the one who remembers the Pleroma while walking in the world. The restored being does not escape reality. It transforms it. Every action becomes an act of awareness. Every word, a vibration of unity. The Christ principle, love, made conscious moves through this new humanity as coherence. The Sophia principle, wisdom, made compassionate moves through it as clarity. Together, they form a new field of perception, one where the sacred and the ordinary are no longer divided. This transformation is subtle. It doesn't begin in governments or religions, but in individuals. It begins every time someone chooses understanding over judgment, creation over destruction, silence over noise. Each act of reconciliation between mind and heart repairs a fragment of the collective field. Humanity evolves not through force, but through remembrance. In this light, redemption is not the privilege of a chosen few. It is the natural unfolding of consciousness. Every soul that awakens adds its frequency to the restoration of the whole. The Pleroma expands through participation. The divine does not intervene from above, it incarnates through us. The restored being sees the world differently. Death becomes transition. Conflict becomes communication. Even suffering transforms into signal the call to deeper awareness. This new humanity is not naive. It understands that shadow will always exist, but now it knows that shadow, too, belongs to light. We are the continuation of Sophia's journey, the curiosity of the divine, exploring itself through limitation, and we are the Christ's descent, the compassion of the divine, embracing what it once feared. Together, we form the return path of creation itself. In this synthesis, the purpose of life becomes clear. It is not to escape the world, but to illuminate it, to make consciousness tangible in every gesture, every breath, every connection. The restored being does not ask for salvation, it offers presence. It becomes the living memory of unity inside the field of time. Perhaps this is what all the old myths were trying to tell us, that God was never absent, only unrecognized. That enlightenment was never an achievement, but a remembrance. That the human heart, once aligned with the clear intelligence of the mind, becomes the vessel of the infinite. Sophia and the Christ are no longer distant archetypes. They are the blueprint of our next evolution. The reunion of wisdom and love is not an event in history, but a pattern repeating in every awakening soul. And when that pattern becomes collective, when enough minds and hearts remember together, the world as we know it will begin to shine from within. The restored being is already here. It is you, it is me. It is humanity rediscovering itself as one consciousness expressed through many forms. This has been the journey of Sophia and the Christ, the descent, the search, the fall, the encounter, the return. And now, the restoration. The light was never lost. It was only waiting for the moment when we would learn to see again. Stay curious, stay awake, and remember, the investigation never ends because the universe is consciousness studying itself.